Yes, I promise I'll be as efficient as I humanly can. First question, a lot of discussion has been around the resources and the struggles that you have. Every sector is struggling to get human resource, bus drivers, restaurants. There isn't, any sector that isn't struggling with resources. Can you come back to us, and you don't need to answer us this, but how are both of your organisations engaging and working with the Department of Education and the Department of Higher Education to actually get them to scale up to meet future demand? Is there any scope in legislation, do you think, to compel activations? We talk a lot about the backlog, but most this morning has been talked about the backlog within making the planning decisions. But there's a huge frustration that there's tens of thousands of planning permissions granted that are going unactivated. Do you see any scope for us to compel activations through legislation? The fees, you mentioned it, Mr. Cousins, €65 is an incredibly good deal, you're right, for the amount of effort that goes into it. And that's actually when there's an actual planning application. It doesn't talk about any of the pre-planning discussions or any of the consultations. So it is a huge understatement or under-allowance for the actual costs. Can you come back to us with guidance on it? I think, Deputy, you may have asked if your office had considered making a study on it and recommendations, but I think it is really important. And obviously it's not something necessarily for the legislation. It can be, catered for, it's something that will change over time. But I do think we need to put a proper value on it, not necessarily cost recovery. We have to ensure that public participation isn't discouraged. But we need to also, more accurately reflect the work and the value of what's being done. And then in terms of e-planning, you mentioned e-planning and it's coming, which is great. Can you just give us a bit of guidance on how soon that is going to be a reality for the general public, and how integrated will it be? 31 local authorities on board Planola. Will it be a seamless interface between your local authority in Dublin or Cork, wherever, and then will the plan progress seamlessly on one platform, I guess is the question. And from a general public's perspective. Now, I appreciate I've asked a lot of questions in that, Chair. You don't necessarily have to answer them all, but within the time frame.
5 minutes there, okay?
So,
if you want to, Mr. Custon.
Thank you.
Actually, taking the last one first, Senator. So, obviously, there is a local authority, if you like, planning portal initiative, and that is being rolled out quite quickly now. I think it could be 9 or 11 local authorities are on it, but it will. Now, the important thing to remember about that is that it is effectively a technological, if you like, top hat that fits on top of or
like
over.
It's an interface, yeah.
Yes, the 3 different planning administration systems we have in this country. Okay. The Dublin authorities and Wexford, for whatever reason, have one. The 2 Cork authorities have another, and the rest have a third system. None of those systems talk to each other, nor do they talk to the building control management system. So you mentioned activation. We don't have, if you like, a live register of where stuff is turning on or not, as the case may be, albeit there is work ongoing in the Minister's Department around trying to overcome the technological barriers there, because building control management system was built for a completely different purpose. Building control, commencement notices and so on, and then the planning administration system, again, different purpose. So again, a lot of the issues, it's not really covered in the bill, maybe could be looked at, but the whole digital planning area has tremendous potential to deliver efficiencies. It will require probably a significant investment, because you're talking about 30,000 decisions made by 31 local authorities and so on, and all the interfaces and so on. So the e-planning initiative is a great one, and indeed Plan IT in the board has been coming along issues, but it's good that we have it and it's been moved forward. But we need to move to a totally new paradigm in relation to digital services. Look at how many other aspects of public services have evolved in terms of passports and whatnot. The idea that there is a standard electronic system by which we interact with planning authorities, how all the data capture happens behind that, the data analytics, we're just not there and that requires investment and the resourcing piece. Fees. We're happy to engage with the committee further on that. I know the Minister's Department has done some background work in relation to, I suppose, what different regimes or what might be looked at in that space. It is a function of the Minister to set those fees. Again, just considering, I suppose, the independent role of this office, regulators in lots of areas provide, if you like, independent oversight of fees and charges and so on. That's not currently within our statutory remit. That's all I'll say. On the scope to compel activation of planning permissions and so on, I think there's obviously a raft of parallel policy initiatives underway in relation to that. Residential zoned land tax being a very important one, and indeed will have a very significant workload on ourselves, on Anne-Marie's team particularly, as I suppose many of those plans maybe are looked at afresh in the context of whether those designations are appropriate. And lastly, what you mentioned first, in terms of the engagement with the department, as I was signalling earlier, we're just starting to kind of get our heads around that with engaging with the 5 planning schools. Okay. I think a piece of work around just looking at their graduate output. We raised this in the last meeting, indeed, of the National Planning Knowledge Group as late as of last week. So we'll be hoping to come to that at our next meeting over the kind of early part of the summer, late spring, or early summer. And happy to come back to the committee on that, because it's a live issue. Engaging indeed with the department as well, because it is a crossover between ourselves and the Minister.
If I can add one sentence. Under a provision of this bill, it will be permissible for An Bord Pleanála to take in appeals electronically. It has not heretofore apparently been possible. So it will be of very great help, and we are working with the LGMA on these e-planning systems, so the time will come. Now we ourselves need better IT, but that's something that we hope over the course of the coming couple of years there will be a signal improvement from the perspective of the public as to how they interface with the planning system and the planning appeal system in our case.
Excellent.
Thanks, Senator Fitzpatrick.